The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, Chapter 9. This chapter is called The Pirate's Return. It was morning when Tom finally returned to camp. Huck and Joe were already up and glad to see him. They had begun to worry about where he had gone. During a sumptuous breakfast of bacon and fish, Tom recounted his adventure back in the village. When he finished, he hid himself away in a shady nook and slept until noon. The day passed slowly, with the boys hunting for turtle eggs, fishing from the shore, and swimming until they were tired and ready to rest. A sadness came upon each of the boys, and they fell to gazing across the wide river to town. Tom found himself writing Becky with his toe in the sand. Finally, Joe broke the silence. "Oh, let's just give it up," he said. "I want to go home." "Oh, no, Joe. You'll feel better soon," said Tom. "Just think of the great fishing that's here." "I don't care for fishing. I want to go home," Joe said. Tom tried again. "But Joe, there isn't another swimming place like this anywhere." It was no use. Soon even Huck was convinced that it was time to give up and go home. Tom, however, remained firm. He refused to leave the island. By this time it was beginning to get dark, so Huck and Joe began gathering their things. They didn't want to leave Tom behind, but he absolutely refused to consider giving up and going home. Here's where he's writing in the sand. "Tom, I wish you'd come too," said Huck. "Now you think it over. We'll wait for you down by the shore." Tom stood watching as Joe and Huck walked slowly away. Suddenly, an idea came to him, and he ran after his friend, yelling, "Wait, wait, wait, I want to tell you something." Joe and Huck stopped and turned around. When Tom reached them, he began explaining his secret plan. The boys listened quietly until they saw the point he was driving at. Yes, they agreed. This did sound like a good idea. He had a wonderful plan, even though it meant they would have to stay on the island 4 more days until Saturday. Somehow, knowing that they would be going home soon helped Tom, Huck, and Joe pass those days quickly. They fished, they swam, they played games, and made plans for their return. When Sunday finally came, the town was mournful and silent. The Harpers and Aunt Polly's family were full of grief. Do you remember what was going to happen on Sunday? Yeah. The villagers hardly talked, and there was a strange feeling of sadness in the air. Becky Thatcher found herself moping around the deserted schoolyard, feeling miserable and talking to herself. "Oh, if only I had that brass doorknob again," she murmured. "But I haven't anything to remember him by now." And she choked back a little sob. Becky regretted what she had done to Tom. Now she was sure she would never see him again. Just the thought of this touched her so deeply that tears began to roll down her cheeks. Nearby, a group of boys talked in low voices about Tom and Joe. They retold stories of their 2 lost friends and shook their heads in disbelief at the thought that they were really gone forever. At noon, the church bell began to toll. That means it was ringing. My church doesn't have a church bell. Does yours? Villagers gathered in the church, and only the sound of whispering was heard. No one could remember when the little church had been so crowded. A hush came over the villagers when Aunt Polly entered, followed by Sid and the whole Harper family. As the silent, black-clad procession made their way slowly down the aisle, the whole congregation stood in respect. The funeral service began, with the minister describing the boys in glowing terms. He related many incidents in their young lives, and as he talked, the congregation became more and more moved. Soon there was hardly a dry eye in the whole church. A slight rustling sound in the gallery went unnoticed, but a moment later, the creaking of the church door interrupted the service. Okay, so gallery in this book is talking about an upper story in the church. And at my church, we call it the balcony, and you go up some steps down below and you get up there, and there are pews up there where people can sit and listen to the pastor. Our organist is also in our balcony, but back then they didn't call that a balcony, they called it the gallery. So evidently there was a noise up in the gallery, and now they're hearing the doors at the back kind of creak open. The minister raised his weeping eyes and stood transfixed. First one, then another pair of eyes followed the minister's gaze. While he is looking toward the back of the church, the people are all looking at him. So when he keeps staring at something back there, they all start turning around to see what he's staring at too. Then, almost at the very same instant, the congregation rose and stared at the 3 dead boys marching up the aisle. They had hidden in the gallery, and they listened to their own funeral sermon. Aunt Polly and the Harpers threw themselves upon the boys and smothered them with hugs and kisses. Suddenly, the minister shouted at the top of his voice, "Praise God! Sing! And put your hearts into it." And so the whole congregation did. The sound of their voices shook the rafter, while Tom Sawyer, the pirate, looked around the church at all his friends and confessed in his heart that this was the proudest moment of his life. And that's the end of chapter 9.